Good evening and welcome to the new season of the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we discuss matters of international, national, and local political importance in a calm, measured, and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I am the equally calm and sensible Simon Sansbury. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, possibly even more calm and sensible, but how we're going to cover the start of 2026 in a calm and reasonable way, because it would be fair to say that 2026 itself has failed in its regard of being calm or sensible.
Yeah, and it's only, to be honest with you, by writing a list of all of the shit that's happened that it becomes clear why we're all so damn tired as to all of the stuff that's gone on.
Indeed.
So
We took a little extra time. We usually have a few weeks off for Christmas, but we indulged ourselves and went with a
yes,
little longer, as it had been quite politically taxing. So I guess now, to challenge the focus level of research that gets done on this podcast, brackets almost entirely by you, and to challenge your aerobic capacity, how about going through what's happened since the year began on three, two,
hang on.
one, and
Sorry,
hold,
pause 1 second before we
hold.
do that.
Oh,
I just
have we
wanted to
got something else?
No, I just wanted to remind people that we are now, because of the wonders of the guys at Ecamm Live, the streaming software that we use, are now simultaneously streaming in portrait and in landscape. So we're streaming in portrait on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, but we're also streaming in landscape on YouTube. But if you needed any of those links, if you found us another way and would prefer to watch it a different way, those links should hopefully be appearing in the chat shortly. And if not, they'll actually be on our website if you need them. But also don't forget to kind of like, follow, subscribe, do all that usual sort of feed the social media beast thing that we all we thrive off of. It's literally how our tea is made.
Exactly that.
So
I mean, I'm concerned as a gentleman with a slightly larger head as to whether my heading looks better in portrait or landscape. I worry on landscape; it'll expand it out. But enough of my idle head-related musing. As you need to limber those shoulders up, take a deep breath,
I'm going to take a run up
and
at this.
I think you should. And
Yeah.
so, 2026, the year so far. Over to you.
Okay, so we have got a handily prepared list. So I'm going to run through this as quickly as I can, but shout pause if you want me to pause. Anyone wanting to comment on anything in particular, please do give us a comment. So on the 1st of January, the PM's New Year message vowed about defeating decline and division. Someone should sack the editor there. I've kind of done that wrong, and that he will definitely still be PM in 2027. We'll put a pin in that one, shall we? 3rd of January, US armed forces bomb infrastructure in Venezuela and capture President Nicolas Maduro and his wife in Operation Absolute Resolve, following weeks of taking military action against Venezuelan boat traffic, claiming these were drug traffickers. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch calls the actions morally right. On the 5th, President Donald Trump reported to be considering all options to gain control over Greenland, including military ones. On the 6th, Justice Secretary Angela Constance found to have broken the ministerial code with comments in Parliament about grooming gangs, and the UK and France governments commit to sending troops to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal that ends the Russian invasion. On the 7th, Rennie Good is shot and killed in Minneapolis by an ICE officer. Nigel Farage says that Hampshire and Solent mayoral candidate Chris Parry should apologise for telling Deputy PM David Lammy to go home, in a comment on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. And Reform announced their London mayoral candidate for 2028 as Councillor Layla Cunningham. The MP for North East Somerset And Hanan, again with the editor fails, Dan Horace, arrested on suspicion of rape, child sex offences, and child abduction. He'd been suspended by the Labour Party in April. That was, I think that's Jacob Rees-Mogg's old seat.
It is indeed.
Lib Dem run Cheltenham Borough Council requests a delay of the May 2026 local elections due to all-up elections only the year before, in contradiction to their party's leader, Ed Davey, saying that election delays broke Article 3 of the European, the EHRC, for free and fair elections. On the 11th, Peter Mandelson, and that's a name that comes up,
He
claims
might
Jeffrey
appear
Epstein
again.
kept him separate from the sexual side of his operations on account of Mandelson being gay. Messages came to light showing Mandelson's support for Epstein continued after his conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor, and this was in an interview on BBC's Laura Kuenssberg. The UK government confirms Sanctions and Money Laundering Act of 2018 allow its assistance of US forces to board and seize shadow fleet vessels south of Iceland. Russia, Iran, and Venezuela have been accused of running flagless vessels to avoid sanctions. The 12th of January, Nadhim Zahawi, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson for about 2.5 months, defects to Reform. Reform-led Worcester City Council creates a cabinet member for Joe Doge to identify savings in the face of a £70 million deficit. The head of UK Armed Forces, Sir Richard Knighton, says UK not as ready as we need to be for the kind of full-scale conflict we might face, as the MOD reports that it requires £28 billion additional funding over the next 4 years. 13th Sunday Times report, PM Keir Starmer has been invited to join President Trump's Board of Peace. This is this board that he's set up that seems to be some sort of an adjunct or an extra thing that you need to pay to get on and is completely controlled by him. In the Welsh Senate, members expressed concern at the extraordinary powers in a proposed new law making it illegal to lie in Welsh elections, and saying that that will limit free speech, because there's nothing more our democracy needs than the ability for our elected representatives to be able to lie to us while they're currying for our votes. On the 14th, the government backs down on its plans to make digital ID mandatory for all workers in the UK, and police called to a council meeting to discuss an election delay, as the meeting was attended by 50 protesters and things got a bit feisty. The 15th, reports emerge that Elon Musk's AI Grok is allowing people to sexualize images of women and children, so creating sexual abuse images and child pornography. Carrying on that, the government announced an increase from 55 to 65 years, the max age at which ex-service personnel can be recalled from reserve. Kemi Badenoch sacks Robert Jenrick after discovering he is planning to defect to Reform. Robert Jenrick defects to Reform. On the 16th, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, apologies for the pronunciation, gives her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump, who was really, really, really desperate to get one. The 17th, President Trump threatens additional tariffs on the UK and EU countries for not supporting his claims to have Greenland, because he really wants Greenland. On the 18th, Andrew Rosendale, me either, defects to Reform. Nigel Farage is quoted in the Telegraph saying that the Reform is not a rescue party for failed Conservatives, and he'll refuse defections after May's elections on May the 7th. January the 20th, President Trump questions whether NATO would come to the US's aid if it were under attack, and that NATO countries had hung back away from the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq, obviously completely infuriating and offending pretty much everybody, and missing the fact that the US was the only country that's enacted Article 5 after 9/11. Housing Secretary Steve Reed approves the mega Chinese embassy in Mint Court near the Tower of London, despite security concerns, given its proximity to vital national fibre network, and claims China will spy on Britain. And the government defends the Chagos deal after President Trump calls it an act of great stupidity, despite previously expressing support for it. On the 21st, the House of Lords back a social media ban for under 16-year-olds. And the 22nd, Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper says the UK will not be taking place in President Trump's Board of Peace, as at this point, due to concerns that Putin, who quite clearly isn't in favour of peace, it has been invited. Former Labour Minister Andrew Gwynn MP stands down for health reasons, causing a by-election in Gorton and Denton, setting off speculation that Andy Burnham will take this opportunity to re-enter Parliament and challenge Keir Starmer for Labour leadership. Wonder how he's thinking about that now. Government confirms that 30 local councils will be allowed to delay their May 2026 local elections by 1 year. The BBC reporting that now means that 250 councillors across England and Wales will now serve 7-year terms. This is off the back of the local government reorganisation stuff. The 23rd, Keir Starmer condemns Trump's slur of NATO allies, calling it insulting and appalling. Later reports also claim that His Majesty the King wrote privately to Trump condemning the words. On the 24th, Alex Peretti is shot and killed by ICE agents at a street protest in Minneapolis. The UK government announced proposal to merge police forces, reducing the number of them from 43 to around a dozen. On the 25th, Labour's NEC, National Executive Committee, including PM Keir Starmer, decided not to allow Andy Burnham to stand to be candidate in the Gorton and Denton by-election. 50 Labour MPs write to the NEC protesting the stance. On the 26th of January, Suella Braverman, in a shock to probably no one, defects to Reform, obviously the MP for Fareham and Waterlooville, just down the road. The 29th, as part of the 3-day trip to China, Keir Starmer announces the removal of sanctions against British MPs by the Chinese state. I think it was about 6 MPs that they put sanctions on. The ability to travel to China can now be enabled if it's under 30 days without visa, and a reduction in the Chinese tariffs against UK whiskey exports from 10% to 5%. And on BBC, Laura Koonsberg, again, I've spelt Laura wrong, sorry. Kemi Badenoch quips that Keir Starmer would probably give away the Isle of Wight while he's on his trip to China. Just to clarify for anybody watching or listening, that hasn't happened. The Isle of Wight is still the Isle of Wight. Sorry?
Hasn't happened yet.
Well, it hasn't happened yet. But I mean, to be fair, the Isle of Wight could, it's obviously a separate thing in itself. So if they wanted to sue for independence, then I guess they could. On the 30th, further releases of the Epstein files reveal that Peter Manderson's partner and now husband had received a loan of £10,000 from Epstein for an osteopathy course. Later revelations show accounts linked to Manderson received around £55,000 in transfers from Epstein, of which Manderson claims no recollection or record. Bringing it into this month, we'll quickly, and then that's it. So the 4th, Keir Starmer confirms in PMQs in response to a question from opposition leader Kemi Badenoch that at the point of considering and appointing Peter Manderson to the role of ambassador to the US in February 2025, he was aware that Manderson still had contact with the then convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Labour had put forward an amendment to a Conservative humble address that was calling for the documents around that recruitment process to be made public. Labour had asked for an insert, basically for things about national security and diplomatic relations to be removed, but then dropped that when it became clear that backbench Labour MPs weren't going to support it. On the 5th, Keir Starmer apologises to Jeffrey Epstein victims in a press conference that he believed Manderson's lies. Police go on to confirm they're investigating Manderson for misconduct in public office following release of the emails indicating that he had indeed briefed head of JP Morgan to act against the then Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer when Manderson was Business Secretary in Gordon Brown's government, as well as forwarding on information detailing finance support measures ahead of release during the financial crisis. And today's news, just this afternoon, Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, has resigned.
So we'll let Simon.
Did I leave any out?
Who can say, Simon? Who can say? I guess locally we missed out the fact that local reform group leader George Madrick stood down, and now Joe has taken his place. So George is still a a backbencher, for want of a better term, so still holding his local councillor, but I guess we'll come on to that later. Quite a list indeed, and I guess we probably better start if we're going to dig a bit deeper. Um, you having just channeled your inner Billy Joel to run through the whole list of things that have
Well,
happened.
the,
We didn't
he
we didn't start the fire.
yes. I was trying to remember some of the words. Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red China. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess to your quip from earlier, we didn't hire the liar.
Oh yes, we
The
did.
Peter Mandelson affair. I,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess with this one we kind of have to go back, I think, to the selection process,
Mm.
and this seems to be kind of where Keir Starmer is coming under enormous pressure for what looks like a massive error of judgment. And I think the thing that kind of, again, we can be really flippant about this stuff in terms of, whoever would have known that a politician known as the Prince of Darkness would have turned out not to be a good person.
Yeah. I don't. I don't kind of get. I don't understand how a prosecution lawyer, so who's someone who is not unused to people lying to them,
Mm,
and obviously we don't know the exact details of what mechanism and he talked in PMQs about about there being a process, which then just sounds like you're hiding behind the process. But
mm.
if you're the person in charge, you're the person also in charge of defining what the process is, and there needs to be some sort of sense check, no matter what the process or your system is telling you. That surely there's something that kind of jumps up and down in the corner of your eye that says this guy's been sacked from or has left public office twice in disgrace. Um, he's quite clearly a serial liar, or quite capable
Well,
of misrepresenting
and,
his entire knowledge of a situation. Why would you think that he's not lying to you when he says that, oh, this thing isn't a problem?
Well, and I think the thing for me, I do love an alternative. If I occasionally dally and listen to other podcasts rather than just ours, I'm a big
Okay.
fan of the podcast "What Most People Think" by Jeff Norcott, and he covered this week, and he
Okay.
said, quite often he will ask kind of uncomfortable truths, but often it's what people think, and it's
Mm.
that there is a simple question, which is, why did you carry on being friends with a convicted nonce?
Yes.
And it's a really brutally hard question, but it feels to me like
It's
a
inescapably obvious, isn't it?
question to ask.
Mm.
And I think it was sort of touched on in the Koonsberg interview where he said, well, I believed him. I believed him. And kind of his kind of defense was that I didn't really think he had done the thing that he had been convicted of in a court of law because he told me he didn't do it. And I guess the piece for me, which is, and the danger is you can run off with all sorts of conspiracy theories on these kind of things, can't you?
Mm.
But there's an element of when you look at the other two candidates who were David Miliband and George Osborne,
Yes.
what even just from a PR perspective, even if you believed him, and even if you believed his belief that, you know, and I'm putting in air quotes here, poor old Jeffrey Epstein had been wrongly convicted. By that stage, enough was known that you would not have taken that risk. I don't know that any business with somebody in such a high profile position would have taken that risk.
It doesn't make any sense unless your calculation is that because he's embroiled in this sort of whatever the hell his interactions with Epstein are. Obviously, we know a bit more about them now than than we certainly did then. But obviously, as a prime minister, he would have been in a position surely to have found out more than we can find out. But all of this, a lot of
Hmm.
this stuff was in the public domain. It had actually been reported. So it's the equivalent of insert political party of your choice here having a vetting process for a potential candidate, and that vetting process basically limiting itself to, are you a wrong un? No. Okay, brilliant. Sign here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Uh,
think, again, as you've spoken there, there is an angle, and I'm about to make myself a tinfoil hat
okay.
at this point, and which is,
We're going to clarify that's aluminium for all of our American listeners.
oh, sorry, aluminum foil. Obviously, to protect my head from the 5G rays that the lizard people are using to control my mind. So, my conspiracy theory, and I'm going to throw it out there, I'm sure this must have been done before. The only reason he got the job is because he was on the inside of Jeffrey Epstein's web. So he knew where the bodies were buried for senior people in America, which meant he had leverage over them.
And that,
Boom. Conspiracy theory drop.
yeah, I mean, the trouble with conspiracy theories is that they have enough of a half truth in them that it's potentially believable unless you're talking about the completely wild ones. I think to a degree we don't know, but
Oh no, of
what
course not.
what
This is conspiracy theory. This is
yeah, yeah,
mad
it's
speculation
because
on my part.
but I guess but then that's the point why and um I mean Kemi Badenoch was making great hay by literally pushing Starmer repeatedly onto the ropes on P and Qs on Wednesday, and after his press conference on Thursday, essentially saying, "Look, it's really clear. What did you know at the time that you decided to to appoint him again in contrast to all of the other people that you were looking at? What was it that you had in your decision process that meant that you either didn't have or decided to ignore and then went ahead with the appointment?" Um, that I mean, I've seen it reported elsewhere that the PM was actually in favour of George Osborne as a candidate. And was it that they'd ruled David Miliband out because he wasn't a big enough political figure or something? Was that kind of I've
Well,
kind of
I,
heard that
I,
reported
I,
elsewhere?
I,
But it,
I've
but it,
seen that said, but you just look at it and it's like, famously, isn't it, that, there are so many Labour, that they got the wrong Miliband brother from a Labour perspective, and you'll have to forgive my one-eyed nature on George Osborne because I think George Osborne is fabulous and the best chancellor we've had in living memory. So I'm a bit one-eyed, but there is an element of, there are two credible candidates there, and you opted for the twice disgraced friend of the paedophile. I've got to be honest, if I was David Miliband or George Osborne, I'd be pretty bloody sore, if I'm honest.
well,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, it's not exactly looking like a sensible decision now. But yeah, the only reason Peter Mandelson is a bigger political figure is they're not all good reasons, are they? They're not. They're,
definitely not. So,
you know.
so you've got yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess, and that's the whole power behind the throne thing, isn't it? So Morgan McSweeney, who was up until today Keir's chief of staff,
Hmm.
is widely reported of being, he has a touch of the night about him. I think I've said on previous shows I've always been uncomfortable that of those that seek significant influence within government without ever having to stand for public scrutiny. Obviously we had Dominic quote the eyesight test come-ins before in the Boris era, and Morgan Sweeney for me looked like the other side of the same coin. Somebody who would never stand for public office, but like to operate in the shadows, pulling all the strings. So, He has
Yeah.
exited stage left.
Yeah, well, I guess the $64 million question now will be: will that be enough of a fire break to stop it toppling Starmer, or will that just make it look like a desperate measure in order to try to, and only then leave Starmer as the last person left to blame because everyone else has gone? Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Only time will tell. Or will this just be is is the strategy? Look, ride this out until May because at the end of the day, he's probably going to walk in May anyway. And there's no point
Yeah, I
changing
mean,
before May because you're not going to. There's not a lot they're going to be able to achieve before May's local elections, is there?
well, and I guess in that regard, do we think it will topple Starmer? I don't know if I'm honest. I mean, he's not. I mean, he's not popular within his own party, um, but I'm not sure that he ever was. So there is this piece of kind of whatever he had that got him to be leader. I don't see that much has changed in that regard. So I'm kind of a little bit, and obviously we can touch on the fact that the King of the North was forbidden from stepping forward,
Yeah, I
um,
mean,
which we
different
can come
parties
to in a
have
minute.
different kind
Yeah.
of machinations about when people are and aren't allowed to stand if they're in existing, but they had rules that prevented the existing because he's the mayor of Greater Manchester to be to also be an MP, um, and by standing down to then stand in Gorton and Denton meant that there would be a by-election in Greater Manchester, which on one hand you can argue is going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of political resources, but they're also probably not likely to win. So do
Well,
you limit
and
the damage to one MP when you've got a majority, a stonking great big majority, or do you lose the mayoralship of a really, really important and now thriving area such as Greater Manchester? And I think strategically you've got to. I can see how that's not a difficult strategic decision to make, but
no.
democratically it doesn't feel the right thing. But you've got to fight the fight. You've got to fight the battles you can win.
Well, and the argument from the Labour Party was that it would cost them a lot of money to fight that by-election, and I think that isn't. So you look at it from an overall perspective, and it's a little bit like somebody wants to make a sideways move at work, and that's going to cost the company a fortune and give them no benefit. So you can kind of see that, but I guess there is that element of who is the pretender to the throne in Labour. I think a while back it would have been Angela Rayner would have been very popular with the rank and file, but obviously her tax affairs have caused her to resign. I guess I think Wes Streeting at one point was considered to be a bit of a stalking horse, but I think he may also have been closer to Peter Mandelson than is ideal. So you start sorting through the rest of the sort of Labour front bench, Pat McFadden, who's their kind of, he's their robust attack dog who steps up onto. I can't see where their next leader's coming from. So there's an
No,
element of they can
yeah,
cut their own head off, but sorry, I've got no head.
no, you're right. There isn't a. I mean, from what we can see, obviously we're outside the Labour Party, but there doesn't seem to be an heir apparent that isn't also in some way touched with a bit of a question in
Mm,
some court of sessions. But quite often in leadership contests, it's not the people that kind of the person that ends up winning isn't one of the people that kind of started the contest
mm,
or that challenged the existing leader. Both, I think, because so in that respect, maybe there's an unknown quantity that will kind of come through that will perhaps be initially, it may even be kind of appointed in a kind of a temporary. I mean, at the end of the day, David Lammy would, I guess, as deputy PM would depend whether depends whether if Starmer was going to go, whether he resigned with immediate effect or whether he
Yeah.
basically stayed on as caretaker, um, sitting in the middle of a burnt out house.
But you
Who
know
knows?
me,
But
I like a bit of speculation, Simon. I'm going to say no,
we
it's
should have a
not going to
podcast
do.
then.
I think, I think, no, it's not going to do for him.
You don't,
And
okay?
I'm going to say that even if it goes horribly wrong in May as expected, I don't think it's going to do from him in May either. I think
Okay.
we've got him for the rest of the year.
Okay, so you think that he was right when he went on Laura Kuenssberg? I think it was on
I, I,
Kuenssberg,
I
and he
do,
said that
Simon.
he will
I
still be
do.
PM in January 27.
If the Tories can last for 14 years, I can last till Christmas.
Okay, well we shall see. Well, we spent pretty much half the pod talking about
Well,
about
I,
one
yeah,
thing.
I think it's the big,
Yeah,
it's
it
the
is the
big
big thing.
story.
It
I
is the
mean,
fresh thing. So we weren't gonna. There was no
I'll
point in pretending it's not there.
shall we do 30 seconds on the Gorton and Denton by-election? At one point, that was looking like that was going to be the the biggest celebrity death match of all, with Richard Tice standing for Reform, Zach Polansky standing for the Greens, and Andy Burnham, the King of the North, for Labour. And now it's none of those three.
No,
So
no. So
yeah, it.
you've got a GB news host, sorry, news host
Mm,
for Reform, and you've got a local plumber for the Greens, and Labour have announced their candidate, haven't they? But I
they
can't
have
remember.
indeed. Um,
As
I guess
have
the
the Lib
fact.
Dems. But do you think there's going to be
I,
some sort of behind the scene kind of pacting going on? Because
well, and that's I we won't spend long on it, but my
mm,
read of that is that I think if Reform thought it was a slam dunk, they would have put Richard Tice forward. I think if the Greens thought it was a slam dunk, they would have put Zach Polansky forward. Obviously, we've spoken about Labour. I think it is not going to be a clear cut as many people thought. I think a lot of the people, again, strange choice from Reform. I think a third of the population of the ward identify as Muslim, and I think the candidate for Reform has said some kind of fairly questionable things about Islam in the past. So, yeah, I don't think it's a done deal, and I think it is going to be that interesting piece where, and I've seen stuff online about Labour berating or Labour activists berating the Greens for running a candidate that will split the vote and let reform through, and the Greens being very angry about what they perceive as Labour's sense of entitlement. Um, so no, I think it's going to be a fascinating one to watch, and one we'll probably pick up as we get closer to and see how it's running.
yeah, Feb the 26th. There's also I think there's a Shirley by-election in Southampton, a council by-election on the same day. So there might be some stuff for us to talk about. But yeah, so we can have a look at that and opine with even less authority and a greater. So next week we are going to be talking about kind of taking a bit of a look at elections to come. So we will touch on briefly that, but obviously we know even less about what's going on in Gorton and Denton than we do what's going on in Portsmouth. So yeah, we can kind of have a bit of a look at that as we take a look at that next week. So
Yeah, and so we'll skip over things Portsmouthian and local because obviously we'll cover that all next week.
yes,
So what do we want to kick about next?
so um, I'll just quickly kind of go to some comments quickly just before we do
Mm.
move on. So Elliot Lee was talking was talking about how essentially kind of the manipulative nature of because I think he's talking about I think he's talking about Manderson there rather than Gordon McSweeney, and making a big deal out of it. He made a big deal out of his involvement in the GE candidate selections for Labour, and also and also asking whether there's an element of kind of sexism with the kind of the revelations out of the Epstein stuff. It's all very kind of boys' club, but also the kind of the stuff at the top. Obviously, Labour have yet to have a woman prime minister. So who knows? That might be something that happens. And he did point out that Zach said that he wasn't standing because as a London Assembly member, he it wouldn't make sense for him to stand he wouldn't want to be an MP in an area that he's not actually in. We have enough kind of, I guess the subtext of that is there are enough MPs in Parliament that don't seem to go anywhere near the constituencies that they're meant to be representing. I think I did see in an interview actually Zach Polanski saying that he would stand if an opportunity came up actually near where he currently serves his electorate, so rather than basically just picking kind of a random place and parachuting in. So thanks for that. So yeah, sorry, what we were gonna move on to from our breathless list. Should we turn to kind of Trump, Greenland, NATO?
Yeah, we have to talk about Donald. So
how do you solve a problem like Donald?
yeah, oh dear God. So I guess there is that element of if we've learned anything over the last couple of years and Trump 2.0, it's not to be surprised. And I think for your own blood pressure and your mental health, it's for a lot of the things, it's probably it's not to get too over anxious too soon. And I think the Greenland thing was that perfect example, wasn't it? Everything's on the table, and it's like, what are you saying, you idiot? Are you saying that you would send troops into the sovereign territory of another NATO member and take it over by force? You know, well, everything's on the table. And of course, everyone then rightly gets vexated and angry and frustrated. And, he then makes those crass comments about, NATO allies hiding, not being anywhere near the front line. And then, people, and one of the things I think with Donald, and it's the risk that we get into, is you try and counter these fits of madness with good sense, such as identifying the fact that I, there is a treaty that basically says if America wants a lot more troops in Greenland, knock yourselves out, lads. That's part of what we agreed.
Yeah, it is. I see. I don't know because but it coming off the back of him basically just deciding to go in and snatch, and not be funny. Maduro was no one's hero and was no, was by a lot of accounts a very bad person. But that doesn't necessarily, how does that give one country the unilateral right to basically just go in and abduct their head of state because they don't like what they're doing? What, which country, who gets to decide which countries you can do that to, and which countries are on the shopping list? So kind of on the back of the world's largest military superpower essentially attacking a country that for all intents and purposes might as well have just been shielded with bows and arrows and rocks. It you don't know where. I can see how. I mean, obviously now you kind of look back and you think, oh, well, he's just talking bollocks like he normally does. And he always kind of makes an outrageous statement and then rows back and then, oh, it's clever. It's part of my genius and it's part of me being clever and it's all the art of the deal. Well, no, it isn't, because it's not an art of any deal when basically you say such stupid, ignorant, and offensive things that mean that no one can trust a fucking word that comes out of your mouth.
Well,
Um,
therein
it,
lies, but therein lies the fundamental, doesn't it? No one can trust the word that comes out of his mouth, and we've got to hold our hands up that we're both, we're both highly critical of Donald Trump.
mm,
But the fact is, lots of people still believe in him and still think he's a great thing for, he's a disruptor, he's all of those things. And I think this is the piece where, you're looking at the kind of arrangement of the world. And, there was that element of nip into Venezuela, knock over their leader, take him away. Oh, have you got plenty of oil? Oh, hang about. We'll help you get that out of the ground and sell that. The geopolitical thing is, well, we know that China has been circling Taiwan for years. We know that Russia is halfway in Ukraine. And if you listen to the arguments for both of those, who we consider to be bad actors, their reasons for, in the case of Russia, invading, and in the case of China wanting to invade, they both make very credible arguments as to why that's justifiable, in the same way that Trump made credible arguments as why it was justifiable in Venezuela. So there is that global madness. I mean, luckily, he emerged from a meeting with the head of NATO saying, "Oh, I've done a great deal. It's the best deal ever for us, for America, land of the free.
was that
Everyone's got a
Mark
great
Rutte going on
deal."
about Daddy coming to the?
Yeah, yeah. So there's an element of, fortunately, that one has gone to bed. But I guess it is the madness of Trump. And there is that piece. Obviously, I've shared with the listeners that I'm blind and I live with screen readers in a purely audible and phonetic world. And I was fairly sure that his Board of Peace was spelt Bored, in that he was bored
Yeah,
peace.
I did
And
see that
so was,
somewhere on social media. Um,
yeah, so
on
he's going to invite a load of warmongers together, and we'll see what we can do
we
to,
get
to
it
make the world
it
a more
it
deadly place.
I mean, you can imagine it looking like you can kind of almost picture it basically being a load of a circle of the world's most awful dictators sat around a some sort of table lit from above, starkly lit from above in some sort
Mm,
of deep, brutalist architecture concrete bunker. But we're not in a Bond movie. This is kind of the real world, and we've got. I'm going to quickly throw in a couple of other comments. We've got um, weirdo alert. It said Trump is just trolling us so that we spend more money on military. I think we both agree that we and the rest of Europe need to spend more money on our military. That's great, but
yep.
part of his reason for doing that is also the hope that we'll buy loads of military American military equipment. Which, given his behaviour recently, actually, I think that's encouraging Europe to look for alternative sources for their military equipment. I think we're a bit more entangled than other European nations are, but that's not going to be quite the payday for the American military industrial complex that he possibly thinks it is.
uh,
But yes, overall
Fair
Europe
point.
needs to spend
Yeah,
more
yeah.
on military stuff. And in contrast, Rob Harris is saying the US has a orange mad president. Europe could helicopter in and save the US. The precedent has been set, and he goes on to say about Europe then take over Alaska oil. Um,
Probably
yeah, no
quite a
thanks.
high risk strategy, that one, Rob. I think
Yeah, let's put a pin in that, and we
put a
can
pin in
circle
that. We'll,
back
we'll
to it.
come back
But we
to that
get the
one.
point that
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
making. You're making the
yeah.
intellectual point that, look, if it's okay for him to do it, then what's to stop someone else doing that? I mean, obviously the last time we Brits kind of went to Washington, we set fire to the White House. So
Yeah,
um,
they threw the tea in the harbour and all of that. So I guess the other place that we have to land on our American friends is obviously the two horrific killings
mm,
from ICE agents. And I think the thing for me that's been most, as well as the two people that have lost their lives, was the 1984 style of just the lies that were told in the
Oh, no, but
kind
that
of,
isn't what the video shows. The video shows that
yeah, the video
she
shows
was
that
being aggressive with the car, or
she drove,
mm,
knocked him down. He's in hospital recovering, and he,
mm,
and
clearly wasn't.
there is,
Mm.
well, and it's the, it was the second gent who was shot. He was illegally carrying a concealed firearm, and I thought, oh,
Yeah, it's
well,
an interesting one for the Republican government to come
well,
out against the Second Amendment.
well, and it's one of those things where it was the truth, in that in the state where he was licensed to carry a concealed firearm, he should have been carrying that license with him on his person. So the fact that he wasn't does mean that technically he was illegally carrying a concealed weapon. However, the
Yeah,
ICE
I don't know
agents
that that's the case, but yeah.
had not
Mm.
checked. Yeah, I have. It is the case.
Mm.
The ICE agents didn't check all his credentials and then shoot him dead.
No.
They shot him dead. And it is that misinformation that follows on from it. And, it is, I think of all the kind of Trumpism and the madness. This for me is the most terrifying, because when you get to the place where, even where there is documented video evidence,
Mm.
you know, of an atrocity occurring, if the state stands up and just does that never happened, what you said, no, this is what actually happened. If you can no longer believe your own eyes, your own ears, if truth is no longer valid, then what state are we in?
Well, yeah, yeah, indeed. But if that's what they're willing to do in public, in front of so much clear video evidence from multiple sources, then what the hell are they doing when they aren't being observed, when they aren't
Yeah,
being recorded, when they're just snatching people, including American citizens, off the street, and summarily detaining them without access to legal recourse, without due process, and um, deporting them from the country. There at some point, hopefully, there's going to be some sort of revelation of what's going on in those places, and it's not going to be good, is it?
no, and I guess that is the it's that, I guess it's that, how does America ever heal from this kind of thing,
Mm.
where both sides have kind of polarized their position so strongly, it just is invade everything just becomes a massive, just almost a kind of point of conflict. I know you're not a sports fan, Simon, but you're probably, almost certainly aware that tonight is the Super Bowl, the biggest game in American football.
Is that where they
Um,
play that expensive game with oddly shaped balls,
Similar,
and
but the
they
big
they
news,
misname it as football, despite
yeah,
no
that's
one
the
using
one.
their feet?
That's the one. But the big thing about the Super Bowl is
Don't
the
at me,
absurd,
everybody. I do know the difference,
no, no,
but I'm
the
joking.
absurd, the absurd halftime show. So they stop the
Yes,
sports match for an hour and a bit, and they put on
yes,
the halftime show.
yes. Of course, because there's nothing more important than if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
conducting a sports event of national importance that you pause in order to basically allow everybody to watch adverts and spend loads of money. Um,
correct.
yeah,
But this year's
it's
the
very American.
headline act
Mm.
is Bad Bunny. Now I'm sure he's
I,
never off in your house, big fan,
yeah, all the time. I
but
absolutely, yeah.
he's a Puerto Rican national who sings
Okay.
mainly in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
So, whilst most downloaded artists in America, you've got, but it's a controversial pick. And it's just that element of why are both sides just looking to antagonize each other all the time?
Yeah,
And it's that, maybe that wasn't the thinking behind it, but there's a bit of almost the person who's signing the contract is going, this will be controversial. Let's see what happens next. You just think, oh, lads, you're just
Well,
looking to start a fight in the car park over
well,
everything, aren't you?
yeah, but let's be clear. Saying some politically contentious things when you're a music artist, or you know expressing a
Oh,
dislike
yeah,
for a particular kind of is entirely different from essentially executing citizens
yeah,
in the public, or
yeah,
snatching citizens off the street without due
yeah,
process. So
yeah. Not saying it was equivalent. Simply saying it's that
yeah,
element as both camps ramp up their position and rhetoric. It's that, well, how do you ever bring that back to healing? So let's talk about something more positive.
yeah.
We touched on it very briefly. Isn't Kemi wonderful? She's been doing a great job at PMQs.
Oh dear
Um,
God, you all right? Do
yeah,
you need a
yeah.
fan or
Well,
something?
we lost. When you went through your list in a Billy Joel styley, there was only one friend of the podcast on there, wasn't there?
You're losing me. What?
So Suella's been on.
Oh yes, I see. Sorry, a previous yes. Suella
Yeah, yeah,
Braverman MP has been a previous guest on the podcast in the Let's Stop Ackwind special, where we hosted a
yeah.
meeting on an
So
online meeting
so
on their behalf, where she
you
was,
know,
to be honest, very charming, and made the made
yeah,
the made the show bilingual at one point, because she was conversing in French to the
yeah. So
people from
you know,
non
so
Ackwind.
so again in the Elliot pointing out the kind of the gender position. Obviously, we've lost the great Penny Mordaunt from the Parliamentary Party. We've lost Suella, but we've still got Kemi, and she's doing a grand job. So I'm not going to ask you to comment further because
I
I
think
can't
she'd have been
I
in real
can't.
trouble if she wasn't able to make hay out of everything that's going
Yeah,
on this week. She is making hay, and she's making very, very good hay. And she's doing, I'm not going to lie, she's doing a very good job of what is her job at the moment.
yes.
Um,
So
because
I
but
guess
if she, if I'm not being funny, if she was failing to shoot at essentially what is an unguarded open goal, then it would be time to consider about her future. But that conversation that seemed to be kind of dawdling around about October, September, October last year, has now completely gone, because all of the, to quote John Major, all of the bastards in her own party um, have
oh well.
verily buggered off to reform. So in that sense,
Um, uh,
it's a self-selecting purge, where the ne'er do
well, there,
wells and the troublemakers have buggered off somewhere else, and maybe she will stand a better chance.
Well, and I guess that leads us on to a little bit of a muse on reform, doesn't it? Again, uh, there is Suella, there is Robert Jenrick, and the other one who you listed in the who've moved across, and they had Danny Kruger, is it? Prue Leith's son. So again, knows a good scone when he sees one. But so there's that element. I guess one of the questions that might be worth us pondering is,
Mm.
and there is a 7th of May deadline. There's like football transfer
Clock
deadline
is
window.
ticking. Yeah, yeah, that's the transfer
You've got
window for
you've
art.
you've got to sign up before then.
Mhm.
Do you think the defections are making reform stronger or weaker?
I don't know that I would categorize it on a stronger, weaker axis. Um, but I think it increases the chance that there'll be some sort of internal disharmony, because you can't essentially spend the entire of your party's existence saying Tories are shit, Tories are shit, Tories are shit, and then invite a load of them to join you. Because you then kind of start to look at, well, you can't kind of make your whole shtick about we're different from everybody else, and it was these guys that completely effed up the country. Um, but the people that have joined recently are the people that actually put in place quite a few of the policies that they're actually currently moaning about, especially to do with kind
Hmm.
of immigration um, assessment delays. and to do with asylum seekers being housed in hotels, which I'm sure the owners of the hotels are really happy with, to be kind of
I'm
guaranteed
sure they
a
are.
fistload of money. So someone's doing very well out of it. Um, so yeah, I don't know at what point you then start to destroy your own credibility as being something quote unquote new and different. But I don't think that, to be honest with you, I don't think being credible is something that's ever bothered Nigel Farage. It's
Well,
not something he's needed to demonstrate, because he gets lots of help in saying what he wants to say over and over again, despite complaining that he keeps not being given an opportunity to speak.
and I guess the piece is, the I mean, my view on it is that I think there is an element of, as a self-declared conservative person myself, I'm actually delighted to see these people go.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be very keen on, if there are any other people who no longer feel the Conservative Party is their home and they are quote unquote better off with reform, go, be blessed.
Don't
Don't
let the
let the
door hit you on the
door
way
hit
out.
you on the way out, because there is an element of, we're new, we're different, I've never got that. I've never got that kind of, I've always kind of rolled my eyes at that as a, well, Labour's failed, Conservatives failed, pick us. And it's like, well, but on what basis? Well, it whether you like Nigel Farage or you don't, he's enormously charismatic, and he has shown that he is able to build a following, and that whilst you might not like the populist message, it has grown and grown and grown. More people are being motivated to join the party. They believe in, whatever the long list is that the party stands for. And so for me, I actually think the defections, I think actions have actually given the Conservatives a bit of a boost.
I,
There goes some dead wood,
I,
and
Yeah,
there's an element of,
I don't think you're wrong. I think you're right. Rob commented that that Reform, being a newly created party, needs to basically to have some experience.
yes.
And we've seen kind of up and down the country how well their inexperienced people are doing in local government. Shock horror, not very, um, because it's a bitter and brutal experience. Campaigning is difficult, but it's nowhere near as difficult as actually bloody governing. It's really,
Mm.
you campaigning.
Yeah,
I forget the quote, but in that sense, they needed some experienced hands to give them that level of kind of credibility in against their kind of, their claim that they're getting ready to be a party of government. I just find that there's got to be some sort of tipping point where the more people that were actually quite literally the party of government that got us into lots of these problems, um, they're not going to be the ones that are going to solve it. You don't invite the arsonists to come around and put the fire out. It's
well, and it's
I just find it kind of strange, but
yeah.
whether that will cause some sort of argument within reform, I guess only time will tell.
Well, time will tell, and there has always been, um, every party that Nigel has led has ended up at some point, when his hand is not firmly on the tiller,
Yes.
degenerating to ferrets fighting in a bag.
Well, when he's no
And
longer the king,
well, and there is an element.
he shuts it down.
Well, I don't know whether, again, UKIP carried on long after Nigel had exited stage left, but what
Well,
it
yeah, look how
became,
they're going.
well, and what it became, and how it got there was not a pretty kind of state of affairs. So I think we've probably covered everything national. We've
Mm.
covered everything international. Um, we've done bloody well in an hour, and all the local stuff we will leave till next week, because that's when, once again, we will start to cast our runes as to what the local landscape looks like, and where we think things might be headed. And the only thing that you can guarantee is that we won't be right. So,
Yes.
on that bombshell, you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury, and please do remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you're catching us. If you're watching us live, so that you can make sure you hit the notifications, so that you're getting notifications about us. And if you want to sign up for our email newsletter, then please do so. We send out a weekly email about upcoming shows. And we're happy to do that. If you feel that you would like to make a one-off donation to support the podcast, then please do. The link is in the chat. But next week, yes, we're going to turn our eye to making some observations of electoral expectations, bearing in mind that the nomination period doesn't close until, I think, about April the 9th at 4 p.m.
Yep.
for the local elections. But there's a councillor in each of the 14 wards in Portsmouth up for re-election, and we can kind of have a look at some runners and riders on that. And then the following week, we're going to be talking about potholes, parking, and roadworks with the Portsmouth City Council Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation, Councillor Peter Candlish. So if you're bonkers about buses, or crazy about cycling, or peeved about potholes, or energised about EV charging, then bear that one in mind as well. So we'll see you then. Join us next time. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.